Hello and welcome, and today I'm going to be talking you through my systems map. So, system maps, they're a part of systems thinking, which involves understanding key components such as variables and stakeholders, or your actors and factors, and how they're interconnected and their purpose. This approach uses complex system maps to illustrate causal and nonlinear relationships within the system. Two fundamental processes, reinforcing and balancing loops, help explain systemic behavior. Reinforcing loops drive exponential change in one direction, while balancing loops counteract these changes, providing stability. Where balancing loops are not present, it may lead to vicious reinforced loops. System archetypes, another critical concept, help identify recurring patterns that exacerbate issues like modern slavery. This methodology can reveal underlying patterns and suggest interventions to mitigate such complex social issues. Modern slavery in the fast fashion industry is fueled by coercion, intimidation, threats, or deception to exploit workers and laborers, involving practices like human trafficking, leading to debt. Key drivers include demand for fast fashion from consumers, opaque supply chains, weak regulation, and social inequalities. Key stakeholders include governments, brands themselves, consumers, and other NGOs. This system map uses systems thinking to analyze the complex interactions contributing to modern slavery. Within the systems map, it's clear that the industry of fast fashion significantly contributes to modern slavery due to a reinforcing cycle driven by profit motives. This is where the actor of brands come in. For instance, a cycle identified in the analysis R1 illustrates how brands' pursuit of higher profits led them to demand lower production costs, which translates into a need for cheaper labor. This demand results in poorer wages, longer working hours, and often unpaid overtime for factory workers and migrant labourers who are exploited to maintain these low costs for the brand. This exploitation enables brands to achieve larger profit margins, reinforcing their drive to further reduce costs and maintain high profit margins, creating a vicious cycle of exploitation and profit. The cycle illustrates the industry's dependence on exploitation to keep production costs low. If the cycle is broken, for example, by improving wages through government legislation or labour unions, or even the brand moving out of pocket to pay, brands might face, brands might face reduction in profits. This could lead brands to seek even cheaper labour markets or more severe exploitation practices, possibly including threats of violence of deportation against migrant workers, thus perpetuating exploitation. Another cycle, R3, highlights the role of media in influencing consumers' awareness. When media, including social media and news outlets, expose exploitative workers and their conditions, consumers' demand might decrease, affecting sales. In response, brands may attempt to then cut production costs even further, potentially worsening labour conditions and increasing exploitation and human trafficking even further, such as human trafficking. This in turn may attract more media attention, leading to a continuous loop of media exposure and consumer reaction driving brands towards greater exploitation. A snowballing effect, if you will. These interconnected cycles underscore the systemic reliance on modern slavery to sustain profit margins in the fast fashion industry, demonstrating the complex interactions between the different actors within this system alone. Within the supply chain, the analysis identified several key actors and factors and revealed a number of vicious cycles associated with poverty, particularly focusing on debt bondage. Migrant labourers and child labourers emerged as the most vulnerable group of actors caught in reinforcing cycles of poverty and exploitation. For instance, the analysis revealed how migrant workers, often linked directly to poverty, are compelled to accept lower wages out of sheer necessity and desire for income. The need for low-wage employment can lead to a cycle which can be seen in R5, whereby migrant labourers, desperate for income, accept lower-paying jobs, which can trap them in poverty. They then find themselves needing to borrow money, often from their employers or slavers, when this entrenches them further into debt bondage. If they're unable to repay this debt, potentially it can be transferred to their family or children, locking children into the perpetuating cycle where they then have to work to help pay off the family debt or income for the family. Additionally, if the debts are not passed on to families, individuals are trapped within their own cycle, R4. This is also vicious, where it oscillates between debt bondage, poverty, and borrowing more money from the employer. The research has indicated that these vulnerable actors, often lacking formal education, are more susceptible to exploitation. Factory workers, though sometimes are more skilled, face similar predicaments, underpaid and overworked in unsafe conditions. The loops demonstrated crucial leverage points where interventions such as governmental legislation or NGO initiatives could help make a significant impact by addressing these cycles. Through education and skill development, there's potential to break these patterns and exploitations and improve the conditions for vulnerable groups within the supply chain. Furthermore, the analysis revealed a number of archetypes present. The first archetype that was identified was limits to success, wherein and initially demand increases desire for low cost goods from consumers, and an increased desire for low cost goods boosts demand. However, in this archetype, as demand increases, there may lead to more awareness around labour exploitation and a greater desire for justice for vulnerable workers, which then results in reduced demand. This ultimately affects the need for cheap labour. The reinforced loop of demand for clothes and desire for low-cost goods can be balanced by the desire for human rights. This is informed through other actors such as the media. However, it is worth acknowledging that outside of this archetype, while increased consumer awareness on human rights may reduce demands and thus sales, unfortunately additional factors not analysed within this system map, such as inflation and pandemics, can directly impact the desire for low-cost goods for consumers as well. Knowing that the desire for low-cost goods is present drives brands to exploit workers in order to keep production costs low and increase their profits, thus staying competitive. It is important to offer an intervention to remove limits and reduce pressures. Thus, a report published by Oxfam Australia in 2017 estimated that the fast fashion industry can help workers earn a living wage if the price of clothing of the brands was increased as little as 1%, provided that that profit went straight to the worker's wage. This would not eradicate poverty entirely. However, it would reduce the cycle of paid employees who are still in potentially vulnerable situations, entering the vicious poverty cycle. There are examples within multiple industries that illustrate the effectiveness of raising the prices to assist in eradicating poverty. However, after analysing further and considering possible outcomes, understanding that corporations' desire for profit may see them take the newfound 1% profit themselves, and thus continuing the vicious loop of poverty for its workers, whereby additional actors such as governmental legislation would be vital. And lastly, to consider the roles of two critical actors in the combination of modern slavery within the fast fashion industry, we look at governments and NGOs. So, firstly, while offshore governments lack the jurisdiction to directly enforce laws reducing poverty in external markets, key market governments have enacted transparency laws requiring brands to disclose their supply chain, which can be seen in the Australian Modern Slavery Act. This is supported and endorsed by NGOs. This transparency is pivotal as it raises consumer awareness about exploitation and can shift purchasing behaviours towards more ethical competitors. However, without additional changes, this increased transparency could inadvertently lead brands to further cut costs to maintain profits, possibly leading to worse exploitation or even company collapses, thus deepening poverty for hundreds of workers who would be left without any sort of income. Several archetypes have been identified, which includes fixes that fail. For instance, governments in countries like Indonesia, Malaysia, and in India have implemented legislation and establishing a national wage. This can be seen in our archetype R8 and B3. Um, Unfortunately, these quick fixes are often failed due to minimal enforcement and local government regulations and monitoring. This leads to an intensified exploitation and a heightened need for a legitimate minimum wage to help workers escape poverty. To break this cycle, effective policy or legislation must be closely monitored and enforced, as the problem is that there is a need and a desire for a minimum wage. Legislation has been brought in, however, there is no enforcement. Therefore, over time, the delay leads to more desire for the national wage. Another fix that fails scenario involves the workplace safety, which, when you look at your reinforcement loop 7 and balancing loop 2, initially, NGOs like the United Nations have advocated for workers' training in safety and health to improve conditions. However, without continued investment in equipment and facility updates, these safety measures become obsolete and workplace hazards persist. Employers, therefore, should see the investment in updated equipment and continuous staff training, not just as a regulatory compliance, but as a long-term efficiency investment strategy that can reduce accidents and prevent child labour due to family health crises. So the idea being that the adults in the family can stay working to earn the income rather than be ill or be sick or be injured, therefore forcing their child to work for them. But in conclusion, tackling modern slavery in the fast fashion industry requires a very nuanced approach that includes a robust enforcement of laws, support from NGOs, media involvement, understanding of multiple actors, whereby they all interconnect and they talk to each other and link to each other in an attempt to understand the system as a whole, so that intervention and leverage points can be implemented to reduce the chances of poverty and make it ethically sound for everyone. Thank you for watching.